I never imagined that moving into my husband's home would feel like stepping into enemy territory. When Benjamin asked me to move in after we got married, I believed it was the beginning of a shared life, mutual respect, partnership, and peace. Instead, from the very first week, it became painfully clear that I wasn't welcome by everyone under that roof. Lisa, Benjamin's daughter, made sure of that. She was 22 when I moved in, legally an adult, but emotionally frozen somewhere between entitlement and resentment. I tried to understand her coldness at first. I told myself that blended families were complicated, that time and patience could smooth rough edges. But her hostility wasn't subtle, and it wasn't temporary. It was deliberate. She ignored me when I spoke, rolled her eyes when I entered a room, and treated the house like a hotel where I was the unwanted staff. Benjamin noticed some of it, but every time I tried to bring it up, he brushed it aside. "She'll come around," he said. "She's just adjusting." I was adjusting too. Adjusting to feeling invisible in my own marriage. The first major incident happened over something so trivial, it still shocks me how much it revealed about her character. Lisa asked me for $120 to get her hair done at a salon. I declined, not because I couldn't afford it, but because she had no job, paid no rent, and made no effort to contribute to anything. I told her calmly that if she wanted extra money, she could look for work or ask her father. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She waited. A few days later, while I was folding laundry, I noticed my wallet wasn't where I'd left it. At first, I assumed I'd misplaced it. Then I checked inside and felt my stomach drop. The cash was gone. All $120 of it. Lisa denied it at first. Then she shrugged and said, "You weren't using it." When Benjamin found out, I expected outrage. Consequences. At the very least, a conversation. Instead, he went silent. That silence did something to me. It chipped away at my trust, not just in Lisa, but in my husband. A week later, after replaying that moment over and over in my head, I finally snapped. I sat Benjamin down and told him I was done pretending this was normal. I told him his daughter was an adult who didn't work, didn't study, didn't contribute, and now felt entitled to steal from me. I told him that his refusal to address her behavior was destroying our marriage. Before I could even finish, he interrupted me, defending her, minimizing it, calling it a misunderstanding. That's when I said it. Either she leaves or I do. The words surprised even me. I wasn't ready to follow through. Not really. I wanted him to fight for us. I wanted him to finally choose our marriage. Instead, he stood up and said quietly, "I can't kick my daughter out." Then he walked away. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I kept thinking about how we got here. About the first time I met Lisa when she was 15, already accustomed to getting everything she wanted. Back then, her demands were brushed off as teenage behavior. New phone. Expensive clothes. No responsibility. Both her parents made excuses, telling themselves she'd grow out of it. She never did. Now the house felt heavier every day. Lisa slammed doors, blasted music late at night, left messes everywhere. When I asked for basic courtesy, she smirked. When I asked her to clean up after herself, she told me I was uptight and controlling. The final blow came one evening when she screamed at me during an argument and sneered, "If Dad really loved you, he would have chosen me." That night something inside me broke. When Benjamin came home, I handed him divorce papers with shaking hands. His face crumpled as he begged me to reconsider, but for the first time I didn't back down. I told him this was his last chance to choose. And this time, he realized I meant it. But what I didn't know yet was that choosing me would only ignite a chain reaction far worse than anything I'd experienced so far. I thought forcing Benjamin to choose would finally bring peace. But instead, it unleashed Lisa's most destructive side. And the real nightmare was just beginning. The moment Benjamin told Lisa she had to leave, I expected yelling, tears, maybe even silence. What I didn't expect was defiance so fierce it felt like the house itself turned against us. She laughed at first, an incredulous, sharp sound that echoed through the living room. "You're not serious," she said, crossing her arms. "You wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do that." Benjamin didn't raise his voice. That somehow made it worse. He told her calmly that she had crossed too many lines, that stealing from me and spreading hostility in the home wasn't acceptable anymore. He said she had a week to find somewhere else to stay. Lisa exploded. She accused me of manipulating him. She said I was tearing their family apart. She cried loudly enough that I was sure the neighbors could hear, then switched just as quickly to fury, throwing insults at me that felt carefully chosen to wound. Benjamin stood there, torn in half, but he didn't back down. For the first time since I'd known him, he chose me. That week was unbearable. Lisa treated the house like a battleground. She slammed doors at all hours, played music late into the night, and muttered cruel remarks whenever I walked past. Benjamin tried to keep the peace, but the strain showed. He barely slept, barely ate. I felt guilty watching him suffer, even though I knew this situation existed because he had avoided it for years. On the 7th day, Lisa packed her bags dramatically, crying just loudly enough to draw attention. Before she left, she turned to me and said quietly, "You'll regret this." The door slammed behind her, and the silence that followed felt unreal. First, I felt relief, like I could finally breathe. The house was calmer, cleaner. For the first time in months, I cooked dinner without knots in my stomach. Benjamin and I talked late into the night, exhausted but hopeful. We both believed the worst was behind us. We were wrong. A few days later, whispers started reaching me. Odd comments from acquaintances, sideways looks from people who normally greeted me warmly. Then one afternoon, I received a message from a coworker asking, delicately, if everything was okay at home. That's when the rumor surfaced. Lisa had been telling people that Benjamin was having an affair with a coworker, and that I knew about it and was covering for him. The accusation hit me like a punch to the chest. My hands shook as I waited for him to come home, 1,000 awful possibilities racing through my mind. When I confronted him, he looked genuinely hurt. Not defensive, not angry. Just wounded. He handed me his phone without hesitation. Messages, logs, calendars, everything lined up. No secret meetings. No hidden conversations. The truth was painfully clear. He was innocent, and yet the damage was done. I felt ashamed for doubting him, but also shaken by how easily the lie had taken root. Benjamin admitted that the rumors had already reached his workplace. Colleagues were distant. Whispers followed him down hallways. Lisa's words were poisoning everything she touched. He told me quietly that if I truly believed those lies, maybe our marriage was already broken. That night, I cried myself to sleep beside a man I loved but no longer felt fully connected to. The trust between us, already fragile, had cracked even further. Weeks passed. Slowly, life began to stabilize again. Or so I thought. One evening I came home early and heard voices in the living room. My heart sank before I even saw her. Lisa was back. Benjamin stood there, guilt written all over his face. He told me she had promised to change, that she had nowhere else to go, that he couldn't turn his back on her completely. He begged me to understand. I felt something cold settle in my chest. She didn't even pretend to be remorseful. She smiled at me, small, victorious, and I knew in that moment that nothing had changed. She hadn't learned. She hadn't grown. She had simply waited me out. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting a stepdaughter. I was fighting a cycle, one Benjamin didn't know how to break. And deep down, I knew I couldn't survive another round. Lisa's return wasn't an apology, it was a declaration. And soon, her lies wouldn't just threaten my marriage. They would destroy my reputation beyond our front door. Lisa's return poisoned the air in the house almost immediately. She didn't yell anymore. She didn't slam doors. That was what scared me most. Instead, she became quiet, observant, watching, listening, waiting. It was the calm before something far worse. Benjamin clung to the hope that this time would be different. He told me she was trying, that she'd been through a lot, that she just needed stability. I wanted to believe him, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Every smile Lisa gave me felt rehearsed. Every polite thank you sounded hollow. The house felt like a stage, and I was waiting for the trapdoor to open. The first sign came from outside our home. One morning, I stepped out to collect the mail and waved to my neighbor, Mrs. Collins, a gentle woman who had greeted me warmly every day since I moved in. This time she didn't wave back. She looked at me briefly, frowned, and shut her door. I stood there confused, telling myself not to overthink it. The next day it happened again with another neighbor. And another. Smiles disappeared. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I approached. People who once chatted about weather and weekend plans now avoided eye contact altogether. The sense of unease followed me like a shadow. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked up to Mrs. Collins' door and knocked. When she opened it, her expression was guarded, almost disappointed. I asked her gently if I'd done something wrong. She hesitated, then lowered her voice and said, "I know what you've been doing." My heart dropped. She told me that she'd heard I'd been stealing money orders from neighbors' mailboxes, that multiple people had gone missing, that someone inside my own household had confirmed it. Lisa felt dizzy. I told her it was a lie, an ugly retaliation because Lisa had been forced to leave and didn't get her way. I explained everything. The stealing, the manipulation, the rumors. Mrs. Collins listened, but doubt lingered in her eyes. Lies spread faster than truth, especially when they sound believable. By the time I walked back home, my hands were shaking with rage. Lisa had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. She wasn't just attacking my marriage anymore. She was dismantling my reputation, my safety, my sense of belonging. The neighborhood I once felt comfortable in now treated me like a criminal. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She tilted her head and said, "People believe what makes sense to them." Benjamin was furious when he found out, angrier than I'd ever seen him. He confronted her, demanded she stop immediately, threatened consequences. Lisa cried, apologized, promised she'd fix it. But I'd heard those promises before. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing something devastating. Benjamin might finally see the damage, but he was still reacting too late. Every time he put out fires she had already set instead of preventing them in the first place. I felt trapped, unsupported, exhausted, and slowly disappearing in a life that revolved around someone else's chaos. The next morning I made my decision. I told Benjamin I was done. Not with him as a person, but with the cycle, with the enabling, with sacrificing my sanity to preserve a family dynamic that refused to change. He cried. He begged. He told me he finally understood. But understanding after destruction doesn't rebuild what's already collapsed. Proceeding with the divorce was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Signing the papers felt like mourning a future I once believed in. I loved Benjamin deeply. But love alone couldn't protect me from his choices. When I moved out, I didn't take much. Just clothes, personal items, and what little peace I had left. As I closed the door behind me for the final time, I felt both crushed and relieved. I rented a small apartment across town. It was quiet, modest. The first nights were the hardest. I replayed every argument, every warning sign I ignored. I wondered if I had failed. If I had been too harsh. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the lies, the silence, the feeling of being erased in my own home. Slowly I began to heal. What I didn't know yet was that my leaving wouldn't end the chaos. It would only shift where it landed. I thought walking away would finally bring peace. But while I was rebuilding my life, Benjamin's world was quietly unraveling. And years later, the past would come knocking at my door. Life after the divorce felt unreal at first, like I was living someone else's routine. My apartment was small, just one bedroom and a narrow balcony, but it was quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. No slammed doors. No tension hanging in the air. Just stillness. I clung to routine to keep myself grounded. Every evening, I brewed tea and sat outside as the sun dipped behind the buildings. The ritual became my anchor. A reminder that peace didn't have to be loud to be real. During the day, I poured myself into work. My co-workers noticed the change in me. Quieter, more guarded, but I didn't explain. Some stories are too heavy to carry out loud. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights I slept deeply. Other nights, I lay awake replaying moments I wished I'd handled differently. I missed Benjamin. Not the man he became under pressure, but the man I married. Letting go of that version of him was its own kind of grief. Meanwhile, life in the house I left behind deteriorated. I didn't hear about it right away. News trickled in slowly. Mutual acquaintances, vague comments, concerned looks. Lisa's rumors about Benjamin's alleged affair hadn't stopped. Even after I was gone, the story kept circulating. At his workplace, trust eroded. Colleagues distanced themselves, unsure of what to believe. Projects he once led were reassigned. Conversations went quiet when he entered a room. At home, Lisa hadn't changed at all. Her promises to find work faded within weeks. She slept late, spent money she didn't earn, and expected Benjamin to accommodate her every mood. Without me there to absorb the conflict, he bore it alone. The house became tense again. Arguments, resentment, exhaustion. Benjamin began to see the truth I had been trying to show him for years. One evening, months after the divorce was finalized, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long time before answering. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. He looked older somehow, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. He apologized immediately. Not defensively. Not vaguely. Specifically. He admitted he should have protected our marriage when it mattered most. He said he finally understood the cost of enabling Lisa and that he was trying to change things. I listened quietly. When he finished, I told him the truth, that while I still cared about him, our relationship had been broken beyond repair. When I needed him to stand beside me, he stood in the middle. And the middle was where everything fell apart. He nodded, tears in his eyes, and said he didn't expect forgiveness, only honesty. We parted respectfully, both knowing that chapter was closed. Time moved forward. I built friendships with people who brought laughter instead of anxiety. I started saying yes to things again. Weekend trips, dinners, moments of joy without guilt. Slowly, my confidence returned. I remembered who I was before everything became about surviving someone else's mess. Years passed. Then one evening there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, my breath caught. Lisa stood outside. She looked nothing like the defiant, smug young woman I remembered. Her clothes were wrinkled. Her eyes were hollow. The confidence that once fueled her cruelty was gone, replaced by fear. When I opened the door, she hesitated, then said quietly that she needed help. She told me she had fallen in with the wrong people, that she was drowning in debt, that Benjamin had finally refused to bail her out. For the first time, there was no manipulation in her voice, just desperation. Felt torn. Every part of me remembered the lies, the damage, the years of pain she caused. But another part of me remembered the girl she once was. Raised without boundaries, never taught accountability, left to confuse entitlement with love. I told her I would help her. But not the way she expected. Helping Lisa meant reopening a wound I thought had healed, and the conditions I set would force her to choose between real change or losing everything. Letting Lisa into my apartment felt surreal. I didn't invite her to sit right away. Instead, I stood near the door, arms crossed, not defensively but deliberately. This wasn't an emotional reunion. This was a negotiation. I told her plainly that help would come with boundaries. No excuses. No shortcuts. No emotional manipulation. If I was going to step back into her life in any capacity, it would be on terms that protected my peace. She didn't argue. That alone told me how desperate she was. I laid out my conditions carefully. She would find steady work within 30 days. She would contribute financially to her own expenses. She would enroll in classes to finish the degree she had abandoned years earlier. And most importantly, She would stop relying on other people to clean up her mistakes. "This isn't a rescue," I told her. "It's a bridge. You walk across it yourself." She nodded, tears sliding down her face, and said she would do anything. I helped her pay off a portion of her debt, not as a gift but as a reset. Through a friend, I connected her with an entry-level job that demanded punctuality and discipline. I didn't check on her daily. I didn't chase her. I made it clear that effort had to come from her. To my surprise, she followed through. The change wasn't instant. There were setbacks, late nights, frustration, moments when she wanted to quit. But for the first time, no one rushed in to shield her from consequences. Slowly, responsibility began to reshape her. She started paying rent. She showed up to work consistently. She enrolled in classes and stuck with them. The entitlement didn't vanish overnight, but it softened, replaced by humility I'd never seen in her before. Benjamin and I stayed in limited contact during this time. Cordial, respectful, nothing more. He told me he was proud of Lisa, and I could hear the relief in his voice. He had finally stopped enabling her, and while it came years too late for us, it mattered for her future. Seeing that didn't reopen old wounds the way I expected. Instead, it confirmed something important. Walking away had been necessary. Not just for me but for them. As for my own life, I continued building something steady and calm. I grew closer to friends who had stood by me quietly, without judgment. I traveled more. I laughed easier. The anxiety that once lived permanently in my chest faded into memory. Looking back, I don't regret the ultimatum I gave Benjamin. I regret that it was needed at all. I learned that love without boundaries becomes self-erasure. That choosing peace sometimes means being labeled the villain in someone else's story. And that walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally chose yourself. Lisa and I never became close. We weren't meant to. But we reached something better than reconciliation. Mutual respect. She apologized once. Not dramatically, not publicly, but sincerely. I accepted it, not because it erased the past, but because holding on to anger no longer served me. Benjamin eventually rebuilt his life in his own way. We wished each other well and kept our distance. Some chapters are meant to end cleanly. Now, when I sit on my balcony in the evenings, watching the sky change colors, I think about how far I've come. The chaos that once defined my days feels like a different lifetime. The scars remain, but they no longer ache. I'm stronger, wiser, peace. And that, more than anything else, is the ending I fought for. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's building a life so calm that their chaos can no longer reach you. People often assume that once the chaos ends, healing happens quickly. That peace arrives like a switch flipped overnight. I learned that real peace doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in slowly, almost quietly, until one day you realize you're no longer bracing yourself for impact. Life after everything didn't suddenly become perfect. It became stable, predictable. That mattered more than I ever understood before. Months passed after Lisa began turning her life around. I didn't insert myself into her progress beyond what was necessary. I had learned the hard way that over-involvement, even with good intentions, can undo growth. She needed space to fail on her own terms and succeed without applause. From a distance, I watched her mature in ways I once thought impossible. Responsibility reshaped her. Consequences humbled her. And accountability, something she had avoided her entire life, finally became unavoidable. Benjamin too changed. Not dramatically, not magically, but noticeably. He stopped defending behavior that harmed him. He began saying no. He started therapy, something he once dismissed as unnecessary. He learned too late for us that love without structure creates dependence, not security. We spoke occasionally. Never about reconciliation. Never about what-ifs. We both understood that our marriage had served its purpose. It taught us lessons we wouldn't have learned otherwise. There was no bitterness left between us, just acceptance. As for me, I flourished in ways that surprised even myself. I changed jobs and found work that energized me rather than drained me. I built friendships rooted in mutual respect instead of obligation. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped explaining my boundaries. The biggest shift wasn't external, it was internal. I no longer felt responsible for fixing broken people. I no longer confused endurance with love. And I no longer tolerated disrespect disguised as family loyalty. Every now and then, I thought back to the woman I was when I first moved into Benjamin's house. Hopeful, accommodating, convinced that patience alone could solve anything. I didn't judge her. She did the best she could with what she knew at the time. But I was grateful I wasn't her anymore. Years later, I ran into a former neighbor at the grocery store. She hesitated when she saw me, then smiled awkwardly and apologized. She admitted she'd believed the rumors once but eventually realized they made no sense. Time, as it turns out, exposes lies better than arguments ever can. I forgave her easily. By then, I had learned that vindication doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from consistency, from living well, from letting truth stand quietly while lies exhaust themselves. Lisa reached out once more before finishing her degree. She thanked me. Not for the money or the opportunity, but for not rescuing her completely. She said learning to stand on her own had changed her life. I wished her well and meant it. That chapter was closed. Now my evenings are simple. Tea on the balcony. Books I actually finish. Silence that feels comforting instead of lonely. I don't fear the sound of a door opening anymore. I don't flinch at raised voices. My home is my refuge. Looking back, I realize the ultimatum I once feared wasn't cruel. It was necessary. It wasn't about control. It was about survival. Choosing myself didn't make me heartless. Saved me. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this. You don't lose people by setting boundaries. You lose people who only benefited from you having none. If you're standing at the edge of a decision that scares you, ask yourself this. Are you afraid of being alone? Or afraid of finally being free?